Well, I'm excited to introduce Peter Wayne Moe, English professor extraordinaire at Seattle Pacific University. I know Peter through my good friend and colleague, Russ Higley, who helped Peter achieve his lifelong dream of spending hours upon hours upon hours with a whale carcass. Who doesn't want to deal with putrefaction in large bones to help in the name of art and science? Oh, it's great. It's really cool. I was talking to Peter before this, and he was saying that he's always had a fascination and interest in whales, so much so that his son is named Jonah, which I think is just awesome. And I could go on and on about this stuff, but I'll just say that Peter's background is he grew up in Spokane, went to school in Bellingham at Western, and then headed back east for a PhD at University of Pittsburgh, where my parents went as well, and then got a position at Seattle Pacific University. He's been there for 6 years. Is that right? Is that right, Peter?
Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. And while he has jumped into the deep end with whales, bad joke. I asked him if he'd be writing more about whales. He said, actually, I'm interested in bees, which I think is another amazing topic, another super cool organism. And so we might have him back for another talk in the future on his work with bees. Anyway, I'll stop there and let him take over. Cool.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, Woody. Appreciate it. And thanks for having me. I wasn't familiar with NAME before I got this invitation, and I spent quite a bit of time looking at your website, and it just does such fascinating work and such important work with marine education and drawing together this whole community. So I'm really happy to have been invited to share with you tonight. I mean, one really cool thing about bees, just quick sidetrack. I read something today where this beekeeper talked about lifting the lid off of his hive and looking down and seeing 60,000 beating hearts all at once in this confined tiny space. And I mean, going from working on this whale that's like 30 feet long, one heart, to like 60,000 of them just crammed into this little box. I just think that's amazing. So yeah, we're going small maybe for the next project.
Nice.
So tonight I had two things I wanted to share with you. So first thing is that I worked over the past couple of years to build a whale skeleton at Seattle Pacific University. And I have some pictures and whatnot. I think and a little talk I can share with you about what it's like building a whale skeleton, especially kind of as an outsider, because I'm an English professor. And I was joking with Woody earlier, if I was leading the project solo, I would have been lucky to get the head on the right end of the animal. Thankfully, I was working with Russ Higley from Highline College. And this was the third whale that he's built. And when I got the permits for the whale, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration said, well, you need to go call Russ Higley. Like, if you're going to build a whale, he's the guy you got to work with. So I'm hugely indebted to Russ. So at the beginning here, I'd like to share a little bit about building the whale. And then the other thing is last year I had my first book published, Touching This Leviathan. And I have a couple of passages from there that are related to teaching and learning. Oh, thanks. And so I'd like to share those passages. And I have a couple of discussion questions too, since we're all teachers. And yeah, so I'm hoping we can have a little chat as I progress through. So does that sound good for a roadmap for the evening? All right. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Y'all see that okay? Cool. So yeah, I have a couple pictures here, and I'll just begin by saying I had a professor back when I was getting my master's, and every year he used to read the same 10 books, and he called this list the 10. And there was Candide was on there, and Siddhartha, Screwtape Letters, Marcus Aurelius, and those were the regular books. And then every 6 or 7 years, he'd swap out the others, but he kept those 4 the same. And I was really taken with this idea. So I decided that I too would do a yearly rereading. And the book was going to be Moby Dick, of course. And I decided I was going to read it every year starting on Christmas Day, because that's the day that the Pequod sets sail. So I did this in 2017, I did it, and then 2018, and then 2019. But in 2020, I read the book 3 times, and which was a lot. The first time I did it was with an independent study. A student wanted to read Moby Dick, and so I was like, yeah, I'll do that with you. She told her friend how great the book is. And so then the next spring, he wanted to do an independent study. So that was the second reading. And then in the fall, I had another independent study, and this time with 2 students that I met just a few months prior, when we were, as it turns out, building this whale that's now hanging in the science building at Seattle Pacific University. The whale had washed up. What's that? You got a question, Moody? All right. The whale had washed up on Washington's Long Branch Beach, which is on the southern end of the Kitsap Peninsula. And she was a juvenile, 29 feet long, and her ribs were sticking out on the side, and the skin was laying over them like a blanket lays over knees. And her stomach, the necropsy would soon find, was empty. And so we towed this whale into Gig Harbor, and then we had a ship crane hoist her 16,000-pound carcass and put it into a dump truck. I'll just pause for a second. So she had starved to death. Her blubber was, a couple inches thick, and she was still 16,000 pounds. That's, to put that in perspective, that's 5 Priuses. I looked up the weight of my Prius. And she's skinny, malnourished, and she's still the weight of 5 Priuses. So at a nearby farm, I had a crew of 30 students, and we flensed her and retrieved her 250 bones. And then we buried them in a giant pile of horse manure. And the horse manure, all the enzymes and the little critters in there leach the oil out of the bones. The guy with the horses, the guy who gave us the manure, donated it for free because he told me, he's like, I got 20 horses and they shit a lot. So he normally has to pay to haul all that stuff away, but he was happy to donate it to us. I'll just tell you a quick side note. If you ever find yourself building a whale skeleton and needing to put the bones in manure, you don't want to use cow manure, because this is so fascinating. I was talking with the guy who runs the Burke Museum, and one of his earliest experiences in the museum was he got this whale skeleton. He was going to build it, and he knew you got to put the bones in manure to get the oil out. And he just thought, poop is poop, right? Doesn't really matter. And he had cow manure. He threw it in there. And after 6 months, when he went to dig it up, the bones had just turned into mush, completely like jelly. And the reason why is, I guess, the cow manure composts at a higher temperature than the horse manure. And so it basically just cooked the bones into oblivion. So fascinating. If I was a scientist, my guess would be that maybe it has something to do with like different diets or different digestive systems within the cows and the horses. But yeah, so if you find yourself doing this, horse manure is the way to go. After 6 months, we dug up all the bones, and in the center there, that's the skull, you can see there. And I put them up on the roof of one of the buildings on campus. And you can see the color of the bones. I mean, they've taken on the color of the dirt there. I put them on the roof, and they ended up coming out white like this in only 4 weeks. I went up on the roof once a week to flip the bones over like they're getting a suntan, and the sun just bleached them, made them white like people would expect bones to look. So then in August of 2020, we started building. I'm just going to pause for a minute and say that I think this project is an example of what makes the liberal arts so wonderful, because I'm an English professor and I'm working with a biology professor. And as my dean says, the liberal arts, she says that they are liberal, not in a political sense, but liberal as in liberty. And that the centerpiece of this liberating education is the freedom of interdisciplinarity, where you can recognize that problems are never siloed within a single discipline, but they always require methods and means drawn from multiple fields of study. Like, for instance, when an English professor builds a whale. Those are some of the students. This was a popular picture. Like, the whole class wanted to take a turn taking this picture.
That's awesome.
It took like an hour.
Like everybody's, scapula.
So because I'm an English professor, I want to think this evening about a little bit about the language surrounding this project. So I teach writing classes, which people in my field call composition. And this comes from the Latin cum, which means together, and then the verb ponere, which means to place. And so in the essays students write for me, they compose. That is, they place together on the page, words and ideas and people. And from this composition, they find something of their own to say. And my whale, I like to think of her as a composition as well, but of an entirely different sort of composition. She was composed, placed together in the most literal sense, over the past 3 years by 158 volunteers who are retrieving and burying and cleaning and arranging and drilling and then finally hoisting into place this body of work. And a body of work, she certainly is in the most literal sense a body of work. But that phrase is also a way we speak of a writer's output over the course of a career, a body of work. And as a writing teacher, I'm struck by how the language for writing, composition, body of work, so easily comes into service to talk about this whale that we built. Here's another word for you, articulation. That's the term of art for building a whale skeleton. My students and I articulated this whale with all the drills and hardware and glue. And while we were articulating her, we were also trying to figure out how to articulate the experience, trying to find the words to describe what we are doing. One of my students, Claire Guyman, speaks to just that, this difficulty of articulating what it's like to build a whale. In a paper she wrote for this class, she wrote how she's struck by the intimacy in holding her bones, the very bones that powered her great tail and sent her deep beneath the surface of the sea. And Claire Guyman, she says that this intimate work leaves her speechless. I can't fully explain the feel of her porous bones under my fingers, the squeaking as her vertebrae are coaxed onto the pipe, the way it feels to sit inside her sprung rib cage, knowing that I'm sitting in the location where her massive heart once beat. Claire says she can't fully explain that feeling, but we can read it here in her sentences, a sense of what this work is like. She attends to the tactile experience of holding these bones, porous bones, she says, and to the audible experience of building the whale, the squeaking as she coaxes those bones onto the 2-inch pipe. And then there's the realization that she has sat inside the rib cage where Jonah once sat. This is a lot to take in, and perhaps that's why another student in the class, Alex Peterson, pulled away throughout the day to write longhand in his notebook. In an essay he wrote for the class, he said, "I don't want to forget what we're doing here. Each night I let my girlfriend read my whale diary. There's just too much to remember, too much to tell her. I have to write the stories." He has to write the stories. I love the urgency here. He has to do it. Alex houses those stories in his diary, but another student in the class, Riley Peters, has a different sense of where these stories can be found. Riley wrote this in an essay for the class: "The whale's life is written across her skeleton." What does it mean for a life to be written across a skeleton? To me, it suggests the skeleton is a text, something that we might read. But then that raises the question of who is the author of this text and what these stories might be that are inscribed on the bones. Well, on the whale hanging at my school, her broken and since healed vertebral processes suggest that she was struck by a ship, or maybe had a confrontation with another whale early in her 1 to 2 year life. Those weren't fatal confrontations. The bone wouldn't have healed if it were, but it's enough to damage and mark the body, and the bones now tell the story. On the gray whale hanging at Highline Marine Science and Technology Center, some of the vertebrae have fused together, and there are bone spurs in multiple places, which is evidence of arthritis. There's a story here too, as my student says, written across the skeleton. How does it feel to migrate from Baja to Alaska with an arthritic backbone? A friend of mine built that whale, and when he did, his crew weighed its bones. There's a story written in within that data too. The bones on the right side are 8% heavier than the bones on the left. This could suggest something about how the whale lived its life, that possibly it was right-handed, or rather right-flippered. And also, its jaw is not symmetrical. Whales learn to feed by imitating their mother. The mother rolls to one side, always the same side, opens wide and takes a mouthful of sand from the ocean floor. And over decades of strain, this repeated action enlarges and bends the jawbone of that side. The calf then imitates the mom, its own jaw forming as hers has, so the very bones of the animal tell the story of its relationship to its mother. When we were building the whale at SPU, and every time I now look at her beautiful bones, I'm reminded that the story that's most common to all of us, our mortality. And we all know that you can't raise the dead. Consider the following from poet Anne Carson. A human is born by falling, as Homer says, from between the knees of its mother to the ground. We fall again at the end. What starts on the ground will end up soaking into the ground forever. So too with whales. When a whale is born, it sinks until another, called an ante, catches it and brings it to the surface for its first breath. And when a whale dies, it descends to rest on the ocean floor as a whale fall. My students and I have taken the role of a post-mortem ante here, catching this whale in her death, a life marked by rising to the surface, rising one final time. Thanks. That's how we built our whale. I will stop sharing here. So I have a couple questions, like discussion questions based off that, but I'm happy to also entertain like any questions that you guys have as well. I'd love to chat a little bit. Thanks, Julie. I see your comment in the chat. Thanks. So do you guys have any questions about the process of building a whale or what the experience was like, or any thoughts, comments?
That was just beautiful. And I think it's a tribute to, I agree completely that it's really important for the different disciplines to interact with each other when we're learning about all these things. And that's just a beautiful way to do it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was working with Russ, so the guy I worked with, Russ Higley, he's at Highline College. And he's built three whales. And he's told me that it was nice working with me because sometimes he says he forgets that there's like this emotional side to science. And so like when we're building this whale, I'm thinking like, oh man, its jaw is like its mother and it's got a mom and all, and Russ is just like science, So it's good to like have that, I think that cross-pollination.
Yeah.
There's the bees again.
Yeah.
I actually think that cross-pollination brings out a lot more on the science end of it too, because you start thinking about things a little bit differently. So it can actually open up a lot of new ways of thinking.
Yeah, it's one thing to say that they have an enlarged jawbone on one side and another to explain why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So do you think that enlarged jawbone is related to the handedness or the finedness or whatever you would call it?
Russ does. Yeah, Russ thinks that it's related to being, because I think on Russ's, the whole right, all those bones is 8% heavier. So it seems like they're developed bigger for some reason. Woody, you had experience building that. Maybe you can speak more to that.
You did the flensing.
Yeah, I did the flensing. I don't
And
know.
stank.
Yeah, I really don't know a lot. I do know that in the same way that humans tend to be right-handed, that the gray whales do tend to go on the right side, and I think there are. From that, I've deduced. I think there are some that do go left. So there might be some plasticity there. But in terms of how that would ultimately impact the bone density and the musculature, it makes sense, but I really don't know. I do know that the whale that is on the at the Mast Center did suffer from an autoimmune disorder, of arthritis-like condition that caused excess calcification, which in a mammal that travels 10,000 miles a year is not a recipe for longevity. But other than that, I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if the injury of this juvenile was the reason that she starved to death. 'Cause even though it healed, it would have still hurt and probably impacted her ability to swim and maneuver.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering, so you were estimating that this female that you recovered was 1 to 2 years old, was what you were saying?
Yeah, that's what the necropsy found.
Okay.
Cascadia Research and Jesse Huggins and Diana Lamborn did the necropsy. And so and she was 29 feet, which my understanding is gray whales get 45, 48 feet long. So
Right.
pretty young.
Okay.
She was part of the unusual mortality event in 2019 when we had, was that a couple hundred washed up?
Right.
It was oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, my other thing was, I was going to ask, it must have been summertime when you put the bones on the roof.
Yeah, I waited until about March.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a good amount of sun and rain kind of to clean them.
There was some, as Russ calls it, legacy flesh left on the bones that didn't come off from the manure. And we
Okay.
ended up cleaning that, like soaking them in some ammonia to clean that off. And the funny thing was that it was like right at the start of COVID when I was trying to find ammonia and everybody was buying it. To
Oh,
use
no.
Oh, no.
But thankfully the staff member who runs the lab on campus was able to like whip up some ammonia using, chemicals and stuff. And so we had like our own homemade ammonia, which was
That's
nice
great.
because you couldn't buy it anywhere.
Learn like a chemical. Yeah.
I have a question,
Yeah.
Peter. For the students, we spend a lot of time thinking about the environmental catastrophes that are going to continue to affect younger generations in the world that they're going to have to live in. And I just feel like when I teach my marine science classes or environmental science classes, there's so much despair and bad things in the world. For these students, being able to have that kind of relationship with such an awesome organism, do you think it helped sort of in like a healing to help combat some of that environmental despair, to be so close to something so special?
I think so. A number of the students commented on how like unexpectedly intimate the work was, because you don't go around carrying bones. Bones aren't something that you usually touch unless it's like a chicken bone at dinner, and so the idea of like you're just carrying around this rib that's 5 feet long, a lot of the students found, or the first few days, a lot of the students found it unexpectedly intimate and almost like sacred work in a way. And they're worried about, by drilling into the bone, are we like defacing the bone and defacing the body? And which again, that was a fascinating perspective. But in terms of hope, yeah, like I remember when we found the whale on the beach and we went to go measure her and see if she would fit. She was actually discovered by some girls who were like 10 years old, and they're out on the beach for a birthday beach walk. Like, let's go walk on, and like one of them even had like a cone hat with the tassels.
Oh.
And they come around the corner and then there's this dead whale. And happy birthday.
Oh,
They were
boy.
like 10 years old. And so when we got there, they were all crying. And
Ah,
Russ told them that they shouldn't be crying because his perspective was really interesting. He said, that the gray whales have recovered to their historic levels. So there's 27,000 of them. And the skinny one, survival of the fittest, the skinny ones, that's how it happens. They don't make it. And so Russ was trying to tell them, like, this is how nature works. But then he said something so profound that I love his perspective on this. And I think this is where the whole hope comes from. He said, Russ was saying that we used to not have whales washing up on our beaches, and that's because we'd killed them all, right? But now that the gray whales have recovered to their historic levels, we're starting to get them washing up on beaches. And like there was a humpback in Seattle a few years ago. That was the first humpback in modern history that's washed up. Because again, we'd killed all the humpbacks. And the way Russ phrased it, he said, they can't die here unless they're here.
mhm.
I just love that. because, you know, when I go on a walk in the morning, I'm not finding like a Bigfoot carcass out in my yard or anything. Or even over at the park where there used to be bears and like mountain lions, you know, none of that stuff's there anymore. So in a weird way, like I feel like this whale's death actually testifies to the fact that like we have whales, which is awesome.
Right.
And we
They
can
come
do
back.
it. We can
Yeah.
get them back.
Yeah.
I will say that we have tons of bears here and I've never found a dead bear, so. There's a little.
I just wanted to say welcome to Jen and Miley. Thanks for joining.
So one of the great joys in this project came on the first couple days where we realized that none of the students had ever used a power tool because they're all like city slickers, you know? So there was that picture in there of like one of the students using like the axle grinder and stuff. So none of them had ever used power tools, not even a drill before. And so it was really cool because I remember one of the students, she said that, you know, there was this table drill that's huge and, you know, you pull down this handle and it cores out a 2-inch hole. And she had said at the start on the first day that she was scared of it and she didn't want to use it. But by the end of the first week, she was the best one on the table drill. And whenever we had a vertebrae that was like unruly, we'd like give it to Hannah and she'd hop on there and she'd drill it. And it was really neat seeing that transformation and sort of the like empowerment or the confidence that comes when like, yeah, I can use this drill. I can do this. And then the other surprising thing was a lot of the students expected there to be like an instruction manual. You know, they show up on the first day and they're like, all right, what are the directions? What do we do? And there's not an instruction manual. You know, you got to like figure it out. Well, there's a guy in Alaska who's written a couple like guidebooks, Lee Post, that are like useful reference, but there's not an instruction manual. And Russ had said that building a whale is a lot like building a deck because you get all the parts at Home Depot, but if you know the tricks, it's a hell of a lot easier. So we were making trips to like Home Depot every night. But along with there not being an instruction manual, we came up to the question of like, how wide do you make the rib cage? Because, you know, their ribs, you know, if they take a deep breath, they can expand or you can put them in. And so one of the students, her job was to figure out how big do you make the rib cage? And so she went and found drone footage of gray whales and measured them to find a length to width ratio and found that the ratio is roughly 1:5. And so, you know, our whale's like 29 feet. So it's about 30 feet. So she said, hey, we should make the rib cage 6 feet wide. And seeing that sort of problem solving over and over was so cool. And the other cool thing was the whale was 29 feet when we measured her, but when we laid all the bones out, she was, I think 44 inches shorter when you laid all the bones out. That's almost 4 feet shorter, right? It's because there's the spacing between the vertebrae. And in the old days, when people used to make whale skeletons, they would just figure, you know, they do a little math, figure out how many spaces there are. You got X number of inches and they just space everything equally. But, you know, science has since learned that whales, that's not spaced evenly because, you know, up by their neck, you know, whales aren't doing this with their heads. I mean, their head's pretty locked. And the tail has got to have wider spacing so they can get the movement. So then we had this problem of, well, how do you space the vertebrae? Because you can't do like an X-ray or a CAT scan or something on a whale and figure out how they're spaced. And so one of the students, actually Claire, whose paper I quoted, she went and did all this research online and she found the scientific paper on sperm whales and the vertebrae spacing on sperm whales, but we have a gray whale, you know? And then she found one about like humpback calves, but we have a calf that's a gray. And so she had to like extrapolate, you know, like, well, this is what we know about the sperm whale. This is what we know about this gray. And then like, she makes her best educated guess. And the thing I thought was so beautiful about that is that early on in this project, Russ took me around to show me various whale skeletons in the state. And he was pointing out all the stuff that was like wrong on them. Like, oh, you know, this one, the hyoids are in the wrong spot. And this one, you know, this part's wrong. But I feel like that's actually really beautiful because when people build these skeletons, you know, they're making their best guess or like, you know, this is what science, you know, in 1944, this is what we think a whale looks like. And so we build it. And now we've learned, you know, 60 years later, actually, no, you know, that bone's actually a little bit over here and this is here. So the whale becomes this sort of like snapshot in time of like, so my whale, you know, in 2020, this is what we think a gray whale looks like. This is our best guess. But I know in like 15 years, somebody's going to look at it and be like, oh, geez, look at that bonehead. He like messed that thing up. But I think that's beautiful because it also points then to the advancement of science, right? Yeah. That like the whale becomes this like archival marker of what we know, and then it keeps advancing from there.
I'm just marveling. I missed the first part of your talk. Sorry, I was dealing with children at home. But I just am marveling at the cross-disciplinary opportunities that sounds like you took so much advantage of. And it's just, I feel like, you know, as educators, we're always trying to justify the work that we're doing. And especially when it's not directly related to, you know, the book we're supposed to be teaching or the, you know, the lab. And it's just so cool to think about, you know, all of these different subjects, all of these different skills that these students are getting in this one opportunity, right? That there, it truly is. And the thing that really excites me is that, you know, the hands-on nature of it, and that you can get this hands-on aspect in almost any subject, because you can always just apply. Well, as a science educator, I'm like, you can put science into anything, right?
Yeah.
So just so neat. Anyway, it's just such a cool and beautiful, as you say, project. It's really, really neat. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks.
I
You
was,
know, I'm
I was
sorry.
just thinking of, you said there's no manual on how to do this. Is that what your book is about? Or
Oh.
you want to tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
your book?
So here's the book. It's called Touching This Leviathan. I stole the title from a line in Moby Dick. Ishmael gives this warning. He said, you should not be too fastidious in your desire touching this Leviathan. You know, they're big. You should stay back, watch out. The big question the book asks is, how can you try to come to know something that's unknowable? With whales being the case, because like we've all seen, I'm assuming we've all seen a whale in the wild, given marine educators. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you see them and you get like a sliver of the back and then it's gone. Right. Or like the fluke pops up and then boom, it's gone. And, you know, 9/10 of the animal is below the surface. And it's just it's like such a great, I think, metaphor of like something that's unknowable, because even at the most basic level, we don't even know how many species of whales there are, which seems something that we should know. But, you know, every couple of years, another one washes up on the beach and then we're like, oh, there's a new one. Didn't know that one was out there. And it actually wasn't until 1986 that we got underwater footage of a sperm whale swimming, which that blows my mind, because you think, like, we put a man on the moon before we knew what like a sperm whale looks like underwater, right? So this whole book is basically trying to ask, how can you come towards something that's unknowable and like you're reaching from it, but it's always elusive, it's always going away. So there's a bit of science in here. There's of course Moby Dick. There's a chapter about people getting stuck in the bellies of whales, like Jonah, you know. And then there's a little bit of like memoir as well. And there's talk about going to the whale and fencing her on the beach and whatnot. You guys want to hear something totally bizarre? Speaking about people being in the bellies of whales. So there's like a couple historical accounts that are debated about whether or not they're true, of like whalers falling off a ship and getting swallowed by a whale. Have you guys heard any of these stories?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this guy, Edgerton Davis, who they're up north, and the whaling vessel is like hunting for a sperm whale, and he falls off, and the whalers figure, well, he just drowned, whatever. They kill the whale, they bring it on the deck, and they're starting to do the flensing to clean it, and sure enough, they find him like in the belly, and his skin supposedly has been like bleached completely white by the stomach acid, and he's gone totally mad. So the story goes. And so then, you know, in the 1850s, what do you do with crazy people? You like lock them up. So they locked him up in the captain's quarters for 2 weeks until he regained his sanity. And then they brought him back on deck to like finish the voyage. There's a lot of debate about whether that story is true or not. But it's, you know, it's in the book. This is the weird story I was going to tell you. Get this. This is from the New York Times, 1896. Okay. So this is 130 years old or so.
Okay.
And this is, you know, people stuck in whales. Upon news of a whale being taken, they are rowed over to the works on a boat. The whalers dig a sort of narrow grave in the body, and in this the patient lies for 2 hours as if in a Turkish bath, the decomposing blubber of the whale closing around his body and acting as a huge poultice. The whalers make no charge for a dip in the whale, and they go on their work on another part of the body while the patient enjoys his immersion. The title of that is A New Cure for Rheumatism. So this was a thing they were doing in 1896, like slice the whale up, put the person inside, and that'll cure them somehow. So yeah, there's a chapter about that sort of stuff, people being inside of whales.
Okay.
Can
Julie,
I read
yeah,
you
you wouldn't care about anything else.
What's that?
Julie put in the chat, you wouldn't be able to care about anything else because the stench, the smell would be so bad.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think that the Edgerton Davis story is true. But I just love it because it's so, the funny thing is one of the accounts of the story, the guy who tells it makes such he's trying really hard to make us believe the story. And he says, I heard this from 2 places and both those people are really good writers. So that's so therefore, we should believe the story.
Or they are really good at making up stories.
Yeah.
There are, well, yeah.
Yeah, what's that?
Oh, did you ever read that book, Fluke?
Mm-mm.
Anybody read Fluke?
The one by Christopher Moore.
Yeah, that weird.
Yes. Yeah. He's awesome.
There's a scene in that where there's some scientists observing, I think they're bowhead whales mating, and they produce just immense amounts of seminal fluid, 100 gallons or so. I mean, just it anyway. And there is and supposedly it's, I don't know, that they're observing this. They kind of get too close and it gets in their zodiac,
Sprayed.
and supposedly that was actually an actual.
Well, there's the guy recently from Washington State. Remember? Where was he? He was out.
What's this?
God, this is he was just in the news 4 months ago or something. That
Yeah, it was a diver, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a guy up
he
in
was a
Maine.
diver, yeah, or he got swallowed and then spit back out by the
Yeah.
whale, but all he had was some bruises on his,
Yeah, it was a diver in Maine, and I wished it was a lobster diver, and I wish that had happened a year before so that I could have put it in my book.
You'll have to do an edit.
Next printing.
Yeah. Well, here, I'd like to read you guys a part of this, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, here, I'll do this part. This comes from the chapter where we're talking about working on the whale. How many of you, has anybody here ever flunched a whale other than Woody? Oh, really? Okay. Julie has. Great. Yeah, I'll read you what's that?
What did you say? Ever what, a whale?
Flunched?
To take off
Oh,
the
flunched.
meat.
Or necropsy.
Yeah, no.
I've heard some people say it as flens, cleanse, because it's spelt the same, but flens, I don't know. Anyway, here we go. I'll read you a little bit from this. This comes from the chapter talking about working on the beach, working on a whale. I'm coming to know this whale. I thought of names on the way to the beach, perhaps Eleanor, my wife's middle name, perhaps Gray. Higley tells me the only things we name are kids and pets, and a whale is neither. Naming suggests ownership, so Higley has never named any whale he's worked on. These whales, he says, should remain wild. Cascadia Research in their necropsy refers to the whale as CRC 1587, but for our purposes, the whale remains the whale. And from the whale, we retrieve 6 ribs, 1 jawbone, 1 intact flipper, 1 scapula, all these from the whale's right side, as well as both hips, 3 chevrons, 2 vertebrae, and 1 sheet of baleen. I see from the necropsy that others have been here before us. The macaw took some baleen and barnacles. Northwest Zoopath took the heart, the ovaries, the uterus, and samples from the propeller wound. The bones we've extracted are heaped amid chunks of blubber. Pieces of whale littered across the beach. Our photographer wants a picture of the crew, each holding a bone. We assemble, whale to our left, ocean behind us. I recall old photos of whalers lined up as we are, though they stand atop their kill or inside its mouth if a bowhead whale. I am uneasy with our reproduction of that scene, holding these ribs, a few vertebrae at our feet, the jaw leaning against my shoulder as I wince into the sun. I wonder what I am doing at this beach. Wonder how the day will be remembered by the crew. Wonder how this story will be told and received. The day coming to a close, I take a moment for myself, walking toward and into the ocean. I drop to my knees. The tide washes over me, its salt cleansing. I look around at a sheen of oil atop the water. The ocean is taking back the body of this whale, pulling hers from mine, the oil slicking from my hip waders and returning to the sea. The bones are slippery from their gore. We wrap them in tarps like burritos, pile them in Higley's truck, and then begin washing up. To contain the smell, our photographer spreads some charcoal over the load, and atop that, he dumps a few boxes of baking soda. It doesn't work. The last time I worked on a whale, Katie tells us as she takes off her windbreaker, I touched my steering wheel before I'd washed my hands. It stunk for a year. I don't want to make that mistake. So when Higley gives directions, I follow them word for word. I scrub my exposed skin with handfuls of sand, exfoliating everything I can. Now wash off twice with dish soap, he says. The dish soap, in theory, cutting the oil. I do. Throw everything you're wearing into the trash. More good advice. The oil has penetrated my hip waders, my jeans, beneath, and even my underwear, all of it greasy. I want to take a hot shower. Oh, don't do that, Higley warns. After the first whale he worked on, Higley too wanted a hot shower. But you know what happens in a hot shower, right? Your pores open. And so his did, absorbing the whale. He stunk for a month. Cold showers for a week, he advises, to sheet off the oil. I do as I am told. When I arrive home, my pregnant wife, she with a heightened sense of smell, buys lemons for her briny, oily, fishy husband, and I grind them over my fingernails daily. Despite the cold showers and lemons, for weeks, she tells me she can smell whale. After 4 hours of work, the bones extracted from the whale and stowed, our bodies relatively clean, we climb into the bed of Higley's truck atop the bones. As we pull away from the carcass, a cloud of birds descends. They begin feeding. This evening, coyotes will come. So there you go.
Yay.
Thanks.
That's great.
So what's
Oh.
next? What's your next project? Will you do something more with this, or have you moved on from whales?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. There's no more spaces on campus big enough to put a whale skeleton. So, which is funny because every time there's a tour now, they come through and they look at the whale, and I feel like it's a little bit of false advertising because like that's not a class we can offer every summer. I've been reading a lot of books about beekeeping, and I've got there's a little garden on campus, and I've been trying to talk to the lawyer, our like legal team, to see if he would allow me to put a beehive in the garden, and then I could have students read about bees and we'd write about bees. And I think that would be so cool. He's a little bit worried about like allergies and bees and neighbors and all that stuff. But when I first pitched it to him, he was also trying to work out the legal stuff for a professor who's going to teach a scuba diving class. And so he was like, well, at least the bees aren't underwater. Because I guess the underwater stuff, he's like, he sees red flags all over the scuba diving class.
Way more dangerous. You could put your beehive up on the top of a building somewhere, then you wouldn't have to worry about the liability so much, because bees on flowers aren't so prone to sting. They're just there to protect the hive. So get the hive out of harm's way. And I don't know if the lawyer will see it that way, but it would be safer for students to have it in a place where it's not easily accessed.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, up like above where people are walking, basically. So their fly zone is up higher.
Yeah, but don't put it someplace where the reflective heat's gonna overheat the hive because the bees will leave. So
And-
like a shady spot on a roof or something like that.
And a negative test to bee allergy might be a prerequisite to take part in the class. And I
know-
say that only because I'm very allergic to bees and wasps, and I stay away.
Although the allergies do develop over time. My good friend kept bees and developed a bee allergy such that she finally had to give up keeping them because it became too much of a danger to do the hive checks by herself. So
It
you
can go
never
the
know.
other way. It can go the other way
Yeah.
too. I used to be very allergic and now I'm not. So,
Oh, that's so funny.
yeah.
So basically
everybody-
anything can happen.
Exactly. Everybody's bodies are different.
You know,
Can I-
one of
can
the
I-
most fascinating things I read about bees recently, kind of similar to the people like sitting inside the whale to cure their rheumatism. Bee venom is actually helps with arthritis. And one of the bee books I was reading, this guy used to be in the army, so he like crawled around on his knees for 20 years and he destroyed his knees. And he, in his book now, he's a beekeeper. He always wears shorts when he does beekeeping because he says if he gets stung on the knees, he has no arthritis for a week.
That does
And-
not make sense. You wear shorts? They're
Yeah.
not going to stop at the knee. They do not stop at the knee. They go up. They are designed to crawl into fur, so they will burrow until they find your most tender spot. I have to say, you've got to be careful with beekeepers because everybody has a story and everyone's convinced it's true. I haven't done any research in the last 5 or 10 years, but the last time I looked, it was anecdotal whether or not the bee venom actually helped arthritis. It wasn't a proven fact. So, but yeah, that wearing shorts so you get stung in the knees.
Yeah, not the best idea.
Can I make a plug for stingless bees? For solitary bees, for the native bees,
Oh yes, yes.
for the orchard mason bees and those other bees, bumblebees, because they're actually the ones that are at most danger, at most
Yeah.
risk, and they do a
Yeah.
wonderful job of pollinating, particularly pollinating our native plants.
Yeah.
And not just our agricultural plants. So anyway, and they're great. They're really, really cool. And don't really have to worry about them stinging. Yeah, because they don't have a
Yeah,
hive.
you could have lots of mason bee homes
Mhm.
and they don't sting. They do a lot of pollination.
It can sting. They just don't because they're solitary, and if they sting, they die, and then they can't reproduce.
It's rare. It's very rare.
Yeah. That would be a really great class for students to research the kind of bees that are supposed to live where you are and what kind of habitat they need, and then producing that habitat and adding that habitat to the garden. That might be a way to get around the legal thing too. Because
My dream, there's an ecologist at our school who like runs the garden, and I feel like it'd be great to work with him because he could do all the science stuff. And then I've been finding there's some fascinating bee books. I found this one by Lotte Moller, I think is her name. She's from Sweden, and it's probably the most beautiful book I've ever seen in terms of just the production of it. It's got all these beautiful pictures, and she's gathered all these poems and old scientific writings from like the 1500s about bees, and she's compiled it all into this. It's like a bee scrapbook kind of. And then I found some old science books from like the 1800s with these beautiful hand-drawn pictures of like bee anatomy and everything. And I would just love to get the students the exposure to such beautiful writing and such beautiful books. And then they're working with the ecologist and they're like tending some of the hives and whatnot. Yeah, I think that'd be such a fun class. A lot cheaper too than building the whale.
Eva Crane writes really good stuff about bees. It's hard to get a hold of her work now.
What's the
Just
title of
gonna-
that one?
Oh, which one is this one?
Hold on, I'm
Oh, it froze.
it's called The World History of Beekeeping and Honey Hunting. And it is magnificent. But it's like an encyclopedia. So it's everything. And I think she's got another book like this, but they're out of print. And
They're big.
oh my God, this is my favorite bee book right here. It is magnificent.
Well, I just wanted to let you know, Peter, I texted Russ just to let him know we had you speaking for us tonight. And he said, tell him I said hello. And I definitely watched the recording. So he couldn't make it tonight.
Well,
But
thank you.
yeah. And yeah, it's been wonderful having you this evening. I think when you said you didn't have places to hang the whales, it made me think that more beekeeping. All right, from Julie. I was just
Thank
thinking,
you,
I'm
Julie.
sure other people would like pay your school and your students if you started a class that was just, articulating whale bones. I'm sure you could find other places to hang them and people would
Well,
probably.
yeah, I don't think I could ever do it solo. I would definitely need Russ. I mean,
Yeah.
he's so amazing as far as what he knows. It's funny, when I told the state that I wanted to build a whale skeleton, they put me on this list, but I was the only person on the list. Not a lot of people want a whale skeleton.
Yeah.
And you have to be a museum or a university or a school to get the bones. Like, you can't just go put it up in your house or whatever.
Okay.
So they would call me every time a whale washed up. And they'd be like, hey, there's this 10-foot whale that washed up. Do you want that? And I thought in a 30-foot space, that would look kind of silly. It would look too small. There was a 52-foot fin whale that washed up a number of years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Which would have been awesome. But my room isn't that big. I only have 30 feet. And actually, I'm kind of glad it wasn't. I know a guy who's building a blue whale for Oregon State. And it's 90 feet long. And his budget is over $100,000 for this whale. And my whale cost only 25 grand, which is still a lot of money, but that's a lot easier to find than 100 grand. And he said his skull on his blue whale is 3,000 pounds. So like when he has to move his skull, they get the forklift and it's a huge deal. My skull was only like 200 pounds. So when we had to move it, we just get like 5 or 6 students and, just pick it up and lift it. So things get harder the bigger the whale gets.
Yeah.
The state also called, there was a whale out on the peninsula, but it was like a 9-hour drive from Seattle. And I knew I couldn't get 30 students to drive 9 hours to go flunce a whale and get the bones out. Like, just logistically, it wouldn't work. So we were waiting a good year or two. And then finally this whale washed up and it was just an hour away, 29 feet. It was just absolutely perfect. But it was surprising when they were calling me all the time for whales. I was just surprised that so many of them wash up,
Mm-hmm.
Did you do sorry if I forgot this. Did you do the flensing on McNeil Island?
No. So for those of you who don't know, do you guys know about McNeil Island? So it's in Washington in the Puget Sound, and it used to have the state penitentiary on it, kind of like Alcatraz, like they'd put all the criminals out on the island. It's no longer a state pen, but they often do like flensing out there. And I guess the beaches are littered with whale bones, and they'll do necropsies and stuff out there.
Well, who lives out there?
Well, now it's like a prison for high-risk sex offenders out on the island. Yeah, they like lock them up out there. Anyway, yeah, we didn't do it out there. We did it at a farm where we could bury the bones. One interesting thing, we went to go check on the bones at this farm in the manure, every a couple months. And one time we went up there and something had been rummaging around, and the jawbone, which is about 6 feet long, was like 20 feet over on the side of this hill.
Wow.
And so we were really wondering, and like and something had gotten into the flipper and like pulled some of the carpals and the phalanges and like spread them around. A couple of the vertebrae had been pulled out. And we were really worried that like we're going to lose bones. Thankfully, we found them all. But the jawbone, that's a big bone. And so the guy who owned the house said that a neighbor had seen a bear in the area. And so I don't know if the bear would have drug it, but also I guess there'd been a pack of coyotes running around. And I don't know if the coyotes would be that coordinated to work together and drag this bone. There was no teeth marks or anything, or like claw mark. There's no, the bone wasn't damaged at all. Because I was thinking that could be a clue.
Yeah,
to what it was.
I like
Something big.
marks would tell you something, but
Yeah.
Was there still meat on it? Was that what they were going for, or just
It had been buried for a few. So they were buried for about 6 months total, and we went up at the 1 month mark, and that's when it had been drug out. So at that point, I think there's still probably like blood and gore on the bones. The manure hadn't totally cleaned them up yet.
Yeah.
It still smells delicious.
When we were doing the hunting, though, one of the neighbors called the cops on us because of the smell.
No.
And the cop came out and we told him what we were doing, and he was like, "Oh, that's cool. Keep on working." And so that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, because it smells.
Yeah. I have a quick question about your like what was the genesis of your book? Was that something that was already in you before the whale that the whale just contributed to, or was it spurred by this whale experience? What how did it come about?
So I've always loved whales ever since I was a little kid. And when I was in graduate school, I was writing this dissertation. It was about like Aristotle and stuff. And I was wanting to try to figure out a way. And so I was doing all this, like, you know, it was like within English and everything, but I kept just thinking about whales all the time. So I wanted to try to figure out a way to write about them. And ended up publishing a couple essays that are just about whales, kind of tangential to the dissertation, you know, away from the stuff I was supposed to be doing. And after that point, I had 3 essays published. One of them was about the names that we have for whales, and it was saying that every name tells a story. So like, you know, like right whales are named the right whale because they're really slow. They used to swim close to shore and they float when you kill them. So it was like the right whale to kill. Like there's a name within the story. So I wrote an essay about that. I wrote an essay about the book of Jonah. I wrote another essay about people getting stuck in the bellies of whales. And so then at that point I had 3 essays and I thought, well, gee, this could be a book, you know? So then it started growing. And then once I was writing the book, then I had the idea to build the skeleton. So then the two kind of came together at the same time.
Yeah. Are your essays in the book then?
Yeah, parts of them are, yeah.
Okay.
I pulled out the most relevant parts and stuck them in there.
Cool.
It would be an interesting connection for you to get yourself onto a research cruise that would go out to a whale fall and do like an ROV. I was lucky enough to go on one many years ago when I was an intern at Mbari in California. And so there's lots of scientists that study the communities that the progression of communities on a whale fall, like the whale carcass when it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and there's like studied community progression in these whale falls. And so that would be an interesting experience for you to then be like a writer in residence on one of these research cruises to go out to a whale fall and then write about that experience. And so then you have like this way that the whale ends up on the bottom of the ocean, and then you have when a whale floats to the surface and comes, and then you have that description of it. And so it'd be kind of an interesting dichotomy of the end of a whale. So
well, thanks, Jen. That's a great idea. Yeah, I wrote that down. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, there's lots of I'm sure like if you just search it up, there's lots of people studying it. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the guys who were studying it, but this was, I mean, years ago, 2003 when I was an intern. So they probably have moved on, but hopefully you're able to find somebody that you could work with.
Yeah, thank you, Jen.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Peter. This was excellent. I'm going to stop recording now.